This tragedy occurred as a result of a deliberate and hostile resistance by Democrat leaders in Minnesota.
What justifies this disproportionate flood? Nothing legitimate, but the president has been clear. Retribution.
This is Today As It Happened. Good Monday evening to you. I'm Stephanie Liebergen, guiding you through our timeline of the day's most important news. From fallout after federal agents killed a man in Minnesota, to opposition in the Senate to a government funding bill that would increase ICE's budget. So let's dive right in. It was a night of vigils and reflection after the second deadly ICE shooting in Minneapolis over the weekend. Alex Pretti, a 37-year-old ICU nurse, was fatally shot by a Border Patrol agent Saturday morning. Federal officials claim Pretti approached with a handgun and violently resisted, but local officials are disputing that account and criticizing federal authorities for rushing to spin the story. Maritza Giorgio on the ground in Minneapolis this morning. Maritza, you were there all weekend, so what are you hearing from Minnesotans on the ground?
Yeah, hey, Steph, good morning from a very cold Minneapolis. You know, the thing is here, we went from Friday having 50,000 peaceful protesters marching through the streets of downtown Minneapolis to the killing of Alex Pretti early Saturday morning right here behind me. And I was here periodically throughout the weekend, just a steady stream of people coming by to not only pay their respects here at this vigil and memorial site that they've made. I mean, when I first got here, it was just a few tree branches that they kind of made in a circle around where he was killed. Now you can see, you know, just so many flowers and signs and candles and people just making their way down here to not only pay respects, but also demand some kind of accountability from the federal government. With protests continuing, the Trump administration is doubling down on its contention, which is not supported by multiple bystander videos, that Alex Pretti brought it on himself by, quote, assaulting agents who are trying to conduct a law enforcement operation. Here's Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino on CNN.
You said yesterday that this looks like a situation where the individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. What evidence do you have that he wanted to massacre law enforcement? Because all the videos that we have, and I do want to, we just have a still shot up now, but I do, control room, want to play one of the other videos. Let's play video number 1 again. It doesn't look anything like he's trying to massacre law enforcement.
In fact, I believe that the fantastic training that our law enforcement partners have, the fact that they're highly trained, prevented any specific shootings of law enforcement. So good job for our law enforcement in taking him down before he was able to do that.
The videos appear to show Pretti exercising his constitutional right to film agents, but Bovino says Pretti had himself to blame and that the real victims were the agents who killed him.
The victim are the Border Patrol agents.
That account does not match the videos or sworn witness testimony. The videos show Pretti filming agents, then coming to the aid of a woman after an agent shoved her into the street. The agents grabbed Pretti and threw him to the ground. One agent appears to take Pretti's gun from his holster, turn away. Then Pretti was shot multiple times. In a court filing Saturday, 2 witnesses, a doctor who tried to come to his aid and a woman who filmed one of the videos, testified that Pretti was behaving peacefully and at no time brandished his weapon, as DHS Secretary Kristi Noem alleged. Bovino, without directly saying that the gun was in Pretti's hand, which it was not, said Noem was 100% spot on.
What I'm saying is we respect that Second Amendment right, but those rights don't count when you riot and assault, delay, obstruct, and impede law enforcement officers.
The Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche also stopped short of saying Pretti was brandishing a gun.
Did at any point Mr. Pretti brandish a gun?
I can see the same video that everybody else can see, and it's been analyzed up and down for the past 24 hours. But there's obviously an investigation that's ongoing.
Did you see him at any point brandish a gun? Have you been told by law enforcement there on the ground that at any point he brandished a gun, that he threatened them with a gun? The video shows he's holding up a cell phone.
No, you can't see what everything is happening. I mean, what you do see is you see several ICE officers surrounding him. You see a violent interaction with the man who was shot. And so we don't know. The video, no matter how many times you look at it, no matter how many different angles that we see, there's a lot that we don't see.
Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, a member of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, said the administration is lying.
This is really scary because what he essentially told you is that if you just happen to be present when they are undertaking an operation, if you pull out your phone to record it, the use of force against you is justified. That is not true. That's not what the law says. That's not what the Constitution says.
So we've seen a couple of people come down here again this morning. It was 11 below zero, though, when we got on scene, but you can still see candles lit. And, Alex Pretti was an ICU nurse at the VA here. When I was here yesterday, there was a whole group of other medical professionals, other nurses. There were chants at one point saying nurses want peace. I see a sign here behind me today that says, Mr. Rogers, they're killing the helpers. A lot of really, really raw emotions here. And overnight, Steph, there was another clash between protesters and federal agents outside of a hotel near the University of Minnesota campus. So, tensions are high, but it is Monday morning and people are going back to work today.
Now let's take a quick look at some of the other major headlines from today. At least 18 people are dead after a massive winter storm swept across the country with snow, ice, and freezing rain. Let's take a look at Dallas, Texas, where the storm started as snow on the left there, but turned to freezing rain, leaving behind a coating of ice. And then on the right, there's widespread ice damage near the University of Mississippi. The college already canceled classes for tomorrow, given the amount of power outages and unsafe roadways. It's a similar story in Connecticut, where the governor is urging people to stay off the roads.
Stay off the road, stay off the road. Some of you are still sneaking on there. Probably a bad thing to do. There's some spin outs and some accidents. It slows down the snow plowing, makes it a lot tougher for us to get the job done.
Massive air travel disruptions, with Sunday marking the worst day for flight cancellations since the pandemic. More than 19,000 flights have been canceled during this storm. Schools in major cities, they've canceled classes or moved to remote learning for today as the dangerous conditions continue. Coming up on Today's It Happened.
I don't know if they think this is like a Trump cabinet meeting and they can just say things that aren't true and lie and everyone's going to believe it. Everyone can see that video.
Welcome back to Today's It Happened. Let's return to our briefing of today's top stories. Democrats in Congress are threatening not to fund DHS in the wake of this weekend's deadly shooting of U.S. citizen Alex Pretti. And that could mean we're facing a partial government shutdown at the end of this week. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed is joining me now live here in the studio. So, Nate, what's at risk? Talk to me. It's partial government shutdown, not a full one. So tell me what's at risk here in this week's discussions.
Correct, but it's a complicated situation because these 6 government funding bills that they were looking to pass this week are all packaged into one. So it's not just the Department of Homeland Security, it's a number of different departments that would ultimately lose their funding unless Republicans agree to strip them out. And the mechanics of that certainly sound complicated. They are complicated. There's a whole lot here at play. It would basically require a number of Republicans working with Democrats to allow these things to move forward, to basically hold back the Department of Homeland Security funding bill. But again, reminder here, the Department of Homeland Security is just so much bigger than just Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. It includes the Transportation Security Administration, TSA. Those employees could go without pay. The delays we saw at airports, those could be back in the short term if they don't pass every government funding bill by the deadline, which is Friday at midnight. So early Saturday morning, we would be in a partial government shutdown. And it's important to say partial government shutdown because they've already had some success passing some government funding bills. Remember the SNAP funding issue during the last shutdown? Well, they passed a full-year agriculture bill, so that's not an issue. SNAP funding fully funded through the end of the year. There's a couple of other departments that also have their funding through the end of the year. But again, There are some that are outstanding. A lot of questions about how senators move forward, about whether Republicans are willing to work with Democrats. To be clear, because of the 60-vote threshold in the Senate, the filibuster rule, Republicans and Democrats would need to work together to prevent a government shutdown. We've heard from some Republicans saying that they want a full accounting, a full investigation of what happened on the ground in Minneapolis. At the same time, we haven't heard direct calls from any Republicans who seem ready or willing to block the Department of Homeland Security funding bill. Meanwhile, the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has basically said Democrats will block the government funding bill. We haven't heard from every single Democrat, but the vast majority of them saying that they're not going to vote for it, including moderates. Schumer saying in a statement yesterday afternoon, quote, Senate Republicans must work with Democrats to advance the other 5 funding bills while we work to rewrite the DHS, Department of Homeland Security bill. This is the best course of action, and the American people are on our side. A lot of questions, though. It's easier said than done about parties working together, Steph.
Like many things in Congress. So let's say we do have a partial government shutdown at the end of this week. That includes DHS and all of the other organizations you mentioned. What would happen to ICE's operations and Border Patrol's operations happening on the ground right now?
See, I'm glad you asked that. And that is kind of the issue that a lot of Democrats have been struggling with, because in some ways, government shutdown, while it would affect FEMA, while it would affect TSA, it wouldn't necessarily affect ICE and Customs and Border Protection. They got a lot of money in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, President Trump's signature legislative achievement last year that they did with Republican support alone, reconciliation. Ultimately, those pots of funding would not run dry even if we were in a partial government shutdown. So the reality is ICE could continue to conduct this stepped-up enforcement all across the country, could continue to do these raids, could do everything they're basically doing right now, even if the government were partially shut down. So in some ways, Democrats choosing to block this Department of Homeland Security funding bill, in many ways symbolic over the sentiment they feel, over the desire to insert more protections in there, more guardrails for ICE. Now, Democrats had tried to insert some things as part of the bipartisan negotiations to keep the government open. They had won some funding for body cameras, some additional training for agents, some additional oversight of the Department of Homeland Security. But the reality is there was a lot of things they did not win. No ban on face coverings, no requirement that all agents wear body cameras, no raising the standard for the use of deadly force. Those were all things that some Democrats had fought for. Scripps reported exclusively about Senator Mark Kelly introducing a bill to introduce some of the things, to require some of those things. Those didn't make it into the final deal. Now Democrats basically saying, unless we're able to put more conditions on how you do your jobs, we have no desire in funding the Department of Homeland Security. And again, as I just noted, even if it goes unfunded, even if we're in a partial government shutdown, ICE still has a whole big bucket of money from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last year that they can continue to use to do their enforcement. The reality is a partial government shutdown really might not impact ICE, but it would certainly affect FEMA, especially as the Northeast is in this massive winter storm right now that stretches all the way to the south. It would affect TSA as well. Those long lines at airports you saw with TSA employees calling out sick during the longest government shutdown in American history, that could be back starting next week.
And we know if we do start a partial government shutdown, the longer any kind of shutdown lasts, the bigger the impact is for everyday Americans and, of course, for all those government workers who would not be getting their paychecks. We are going to be talking a lot about that this week.
Indeed.
Scripps News congressional correspondent Sandy Reid, thank you. Thanks. Straight ahead on Today As It Happened.
Just because the storm has passed does not mean that the danger to homeless New Yorkers has passed. Outreach teams are only intensifying their efforts today to connect vulnerable New Yorkers to shelter.
And later,
I'm John Matteries with an important warning about opening accounts at online retailers and storing your credit card there. One man found out why that can be very, very risky.
welcome back to Today's It Happened. I'm Stephanie Liebergen. Let's continue our walkthrough of the day's top headlines. The winter storm caused massive air travel disruptions, with Sunday marking the worst day for flight cancellations since the pandemic. Well, that massive winter storm wreaked havoc on the Northeast, dumping nearly a foot of snow in the New York City area, forcing LaGuardia Airport to completely shut down for hours. Scripps News national correspondent Mitch McCann joining us live from New York with a little bit more on how exactly things are looking this morning. Mitch, we heard from New York's Mayor Zohran Mamdani, recently held a press conference about the storm. What did he have to say?
Yeah, that's certainly right. Good afternoon from New York, where it is still very cold here. It's around -3 degrees Celsius or 26 degrees Fahrenheit. As you mentioned, Zohran Mamdani had that press conference, the new New York mayor this morning, and he talked about New York City's response to the storm over the last 24 hours. And he said the forecast was relatively true. That's how it happened. He said there was around a foot of snow or 30 centimetres of snow in New York City. But he had some interesting facts in terms of the city's response and how many people or pieces of equipment were deployed. He said 5,000 workers traversed 6,000 miles of roadway multiple times using 2,500 pieces of equipment. So Zohran Mamdani said the city did well because they prepared well in the last couple of days. Now, he also talked about homeless New Yorkers. He was very concerned that many homeless New Yorkers are still out and about and needing warm places to go. He said in the last 24 hours, around 170 people have been placed in hospitals or homeless shelters, but he said the need still remains for those people, and he urged anyone in New York to call emergency services if they knew of anyone that needed help immediately. So Zohran Mamdani spoke about those issues this morning. One of the other things people have been talking about considerably here in New York is going back to school. Now, public schools are closed here in New York this morning. Mamdani said around 4,000 parents, teachers and students had logged on to digital learning classrooms this morning. Many people unhappy they didn't get a snow day, but Mamdani said those children were welcome to throw snowballs at them if they got the chance.
I remember Mamdani talking about that school not being canceled and going virtual on Monday. I remember him making that announcement Friday last week before the storm even set in. But talk to me a little more broadly, Mitch. What type of impact are we seeing in other states around the country?
Yeah, look, as you mentioned earlier, the storm has battered much of the United States. And what I think is interesting here is some of these southern states that usually get cold temperatures don't get temperatures this cold. We've seen parts of Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Georgia face really cold temperatures in the last couple of days. We know hundreds of thousands of people are still without power in much of the South. More than 85 million people remain under extreme cold weather warnings in the United States. And we also know some parts of the Northeast, where we are now, won't get above freezing, Washington, D.C. being one of these cities, until at least February. So much of the country feeling this cold at the moment. Of course, there have been many flight cancellations, so people are finding it difficult to travel around. More than 10,700 cancellations yesterday and another 4,000 earlier this morning. So this storm wreaking havoc, the worst of it has passed, but it is still very, very cold.
Still very cold and still very difficult for many people to even get out and about. A lot of recommendations from officials, not only in New York City, we heard from West Virginia and we heard from Connecticut and other places. For as many people as possible, just stay home today if you can. Scripps News national correspondent Mitch McCann live in New York. Thank you very much. Now to some other stories making headlines for us this hour. Israel says it has recovered the remains of the final hostage in Gaza. This clears the way for the next phase of the ceasefire that stopped the Israel-Hamas war. The military conducted a large-scale operation in a northern Gaza cemetery to locate the remains of Ron Gavila. The 24-year-old police officer was killed fighting Hamas militants during the October 7th attack in 2023. The return of all the hostages has been a key part of the ceasefire's first phase, and since the ceasefire began, 20 living hostages and the remains of 27 others have been returned to Israel. A U.S. carrier strike group is now in the Middle East, according to two sources. It's in the Indian Ocean, as President Trump reportedly considers options for striking Iran. Now, nothing indicates he has made a decision about military action, and allies are urging him to hold off. But President Trump says he's threatening the Iranian regime for its brutal crackdown on protesters.
Do you have an online shopping graveyard? I'm talking about accounts that you've opened up once and then forgot about, all with the same password and stored credit card. Well, those forgotten accounts could be putting your personal information at risk.
Jerry Rouse
is the initial order 4:47 a.m.
November 24th.
Says his Gap account was hacked.
I woke up to a series of emails from Gap saying that I had placed an order, and then I got another email at 4:48 saying that my order had changed its shipping address.
He says someone started shipping clothing to a California address on his dime.
I knew that somebody had hacked my Gap account.
He actually blames himself, saying he used an old password and stored his credit card on the site.
And my credit card was stored on my Gap account.
Digital privacy expert Kristen Lewis with the company Aura says incidents like this ramp up after the holidays. She says while most online accounts are perfectly safe, there is no need to save your credit card for a one-time transaction.
When people have that information once, they can use it to target any type of account that you have.
She warns against using the same password for every retailer's website.
You wouldn't leave your house keys all over the place and not change your locks if you lost them.
And encourages consumers to use a password manager. Rouse says he wishes Gap had offered him a two-step login, an extra security measure to confirm an order.
There was no two-factor authentication. There was never an email before that saying, hey, we've noticed an unusual login. Do you approve this?
According to payments.com, only about half of online retailers offer two-factor authentication. Without that extra layer of security, Rouse says he'll no longer store cards on retail sites.
If you find yourself not seeing those extra security measures, I would think long and hard about storing that credit card information on that website.
And that way you don't waste your money. John Mattery, Scripps News Group.
Coming up on Today's It Happened.
He has outlined a clear and simple path to restoring law and order in Minnesota. Number 1, Governor Walz, Mayor Frey, and all Democrat leaders should turn over all criminal illegal aliens currently incarcerated in their prisons and jails to federal authorities, along with any illegal aliens with active warrants or known criminal histories for immediate deportation.
Spoke with the governor just a little while ago, and he is hopeful that this is the beginning of a wind down, but it is only also the beginning of accountability for what happened here, because getting ICE out of Minnesota is the first and most important step, but there has to be accountability for what has happened to people.
Welcome back to Today's It Happened, Scripps News end-of-day snapshot of our biggest stories. So let's pick back up right where we left off.
Federal judges heard two separate cases today regarding immigration action in Minnesota. The first case involves Minnesota Attorney General calling for an end to Operation Metro Surge and for agents to leave the state. Scripps News legal affairs correspondent Avajoy Burnett is in our D.C. newsroom. She's been tracking all of these cases. That brings us up to speed, or if you could, bring us up to speed on what these two court proceedings are ultimately about.
Hey there, Andrew. Well, the judge in this matter, her name is Catherine Menendez. She heard arguments for about 2 hours today, even a little bit more than 2 hours. And she said if there was such a thing as a front burner, this case would be right up there. However, she did not immediately make a ruling. The backstory here is Alex Pretti, the 37-year-old man who was shot and killed after an encounter with ICE agents over the weekend. This is drawing renewed attention to the operations of ICE in the state of Minnesota. And after that shooting, the attorneys who were representing the state of Minnesota, they quickly wrote a letter over the weekend and sent that letter to the judge asking for a rapid change in the way things are going on there in the state of Minnesota. They describe the situation as, quote, grave, and they also believe the administration is acting unlawfully. And this is why they're asking the judge to prevent the administration from moving forward with operations, ICE operations there in the state, especially in the city of Minneapolis, until this case moves its way through the court system. The judge, however, she really pushed back against the attorneys who spoke up for the state of Minnesota because she wanted to know what part of the Constitution gives her the authority to stop the federal government from continuing with these actions. And I'm going to read for you a portion of what she said. She said, "We are in shockingly unusual times, but I don't know that that gives me power to craft a remedy based on the 10th Amendment." So it gives you an idea that she is being very cautious about moving forward, and she wanted to know what gives her the authority to make any changes. Minnesota says the administration is bullying the state of Minnesota, and they actually point to a letter that was also sent to the state over the weekend, a very active weekend here for letters that were being sent around. And this letter was from the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. It was sent to the governor of the state of Minnesota, Tim Walz, and she's accusing localities of breaking federal rules. Take a listen to what the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota said today after the hearings.
The Pam Bondi letter, it kind of reveals what this is all about. This is not about fraud, and it's not even about immigration, and it's certainly not about law enforcement. It's about handing over documents of the state of Minnesota, private information, including voting information, to the federal government. That's what this is about. And that's why we're fighting it.
Now, that's a point that the judge brought up when it came time for the Department of Justice attorney to make their case in front of Judge Menendez. The judge wanted to know, why is it that there's so many agents in the state of Minnesota? She pointed to Chicago, for example, a much bigger city than Minneapolis, and she said there are about 400 agents that were in Chicago. So why is it that Minneapolis, which is much smaller, and surrounding areas have about 3,000 to 4,000 agents in their jurisdictions? And the DOJ attorney couldn't really explain why the numbers are the way they are. But what this attorney did explain to the judge is that the Department of Justice, the administration, ICE agents, they are in these jurisdictions because they want to force these localities to follow federal laws. It's not a matter of them trying to get the administration to go along with their own principles of the administration, but it's much bigger than that. In the eyes of this DOJ attorney, they believe they have a right to force these localities to follow federal rules. Now, right around 2 o'clock this afternoon, there was supposed to be a second court hearing right there in the state of Minnesota, and that has to do with another group asking a federal judge to force the Department of Justice, to force the federal government to preserve any evidence that could be used in future court proceedings, especially when it comes to people in the state of Minnesota who were harmed by some of these ICE agents. That is possibly ongoing right now. We were not able to get into that particular proceeding because they do not have a virtual option. But of course, we will continue to watch and wait to see what exactly happens after that particular proceeding right around 2 this afternoon, Andrew, and then the one earlier today that started at 10 and ended close to 1.
All right, we will continue to monitor that and check back in with you for any developments there. Our legal affairs correspondent, Joy Burnett, for us in our D.C. newsroom. The White House says the president and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz had a good call today, both sides laying out what they want to see from the other. And the high-stakes call comes after federal officers shot and killed 2 U.S. citizens since the beginning of Operation Metro Surge earlier this month.
This tragedy occurred as a result of a deliberate and hostile resistance by Democrat leaders in Minnesota.
Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull joins us now live. And Haley, what can you tell us about that call between the governor and the president? And what are some of the signals that you're picking up about how those two sides are going to work together moving forward?
Yeah, Andrew, that really is a big question. What we know is President Trump and Governor Walz speaking by phone today, as the White House says the administration is reviewing everything following Saturday's shooting of Alex Pretti, but doubling down on blaming Democrats. Now, the president said Walz called to request to work together and that the two were on a, quote, similar wavelength, which marks a significant shift in tone from the repeated criticisms towards Walz we have heard from the administration. The president said he told the governor they were looking for, quote, any and all criminals that they have in their possession. The White House said he called specifically for the state to turn over arrested and incarcerated criminal undocumented migrants and for state and local officials to work with federal officials in order for Customs and Border Patrol to not be needed to support ICE. Now, notably, the governor's office also underscoring and suggesting that state and local officials already do notify federal authorities. The White House, this is significant coming after the killing of Alex Pretti over the weekend, after top officials, including Secretary Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller, linked Pretti specifically to domestic terrorism. Noem specifically alleging that he wanted to inflict maximum damage, she said, without providing specific evidence publicly. The White House today's tone appeared to contrast that. The White House repeatedly stating that the president wants to let the investigation play out, while at the same time, again, doubling down on criticizing Democratic leaders for, in their view, encouraging what they call agitators. Now, the administration noted that DHS and FBI are investigating, with CBP conducting internal reviews. The White House also noting that in the call between the president and the governor, that the president said he would have a discussion about an independent state investigation, but not committing to it. We pressed the White House press secretary on those investigations. Listen.
I want to go back to some of the comments from Stephen Miller and Secretary Note. You've made clear the president wants to see the investigation play out when answering some of the questions on the specific details. Is he concerned that some of those definitive statements made by other officials risks public perception of the credibility of those investigations now playing out?
Again, the president believes that these investigations are credible, they are continuing, they are active, and he wants to let them play out.
And Andrew, in the backdrop of all of this, the president also tapping border czar Tom Homan to go to the ground in Minnesota as well, as we are seeing these developments continue.
And Haley, on that point, what do we know about his deployment there and maybe how it impacts some of the other players that we know are leading these immigration efforts, whether it's Kristi Noem or Gregory Bovino?
Well, the president is saying that Homan will report directly to him, calling him tough but fair. Homan is someone who has years of law enforcement experience spanning administrations across both parties. The press secretary describing Homan as the main point of contact on the ground in Minneapolis. And this is significant as it is a move we have not seen publicly play out to this level in the past. But the White House also appearing to dismiss reading into this, maintaining that the president has confidence in Secretary Noem, rather pointing out that Homan has an ability to go somewhere quickly at a moment's notice, whereas Noem is also dealing with a winter storm at this moment. Now, the White House says Homan will be managing ICE operations on the ground. The press secretary saying to arrest the, quote, worst criminal illegal aliens and coordinate with those leading fraud investigations. The White House also noting that Homan has been working with Secretary Noem and the president over the past year, again reiterating that Noem maintains the president's confidence. So certainly a notable development, though, today, Andrew.
Certainly. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull for us from the White House. Haley, thank you.
Straight ahead on Today As It Happened.
The federal government wants help from private companies to help track down and photograph undocumented immigrants. I'm Scripps News investigative reporter Patrick Terpstra. Ahead, what we are learning about what critics call ICE bounty hunters.
You're watching Today As It Happened, Scripps News recap of the day's biggest events. So let's dive right in.
Well, the surge of immigration arrests in Minneapolis and other cities shows no signs of letting up. Scripps News has learned that the Trump administration has been taking steps to hire private companies to help track down suspected undocumented immigrants at work or at home. Our months-long investigative initiative, ICE Inc., spotlights how the mass deportation push has enriched for-profit businesses. For more on this, I'm joined by Patrick Terpstra. He's our investigative correspondent here in D.C. And Patrick, what did you find?
Well, we went through contracting records and we found that just before Christmas, ICE actually awarded contracts to 13 different companies to help boost the numbers of immigration arrests. And these are companies that, if they do that successfully, can earn millions of dollars. Federal agents burst into a home in Minneapolis with a battering ram this month to take a Liberian immigrant into custody. Now, even more people might be targeted with an avalanche of new money for ICE from Congress, $30 billion. Many arrests like these begin with ICE first determining where people live or work, sometimes using a lengthy process known as skip tracing. In December, ICE awarded contracts to 13 companies to provide skip tracing services nationwide for the next 2 years, according to federal contracting records reviewed by the Scripps News investigative team. The actual contracts aren't public, but in October, DHS published this document saying ICE had an immediate need for skip tracing, using government data, the web, and physical in-person surveillance, providing a collection of photos and documents verifying the alien's residence and or place of employment to the government. And the job doesn't end there. Contractors may be asked to deliver and serve official government documents to the alien. There is also the potential for bonuses. The more undocumented immigrants they find, the more money the businesses can make.
We're gonna come back for your whole family, okay?
No, okay, no problem.
Are these companies essentially bounty hunters?
I would agree with that. It's the same kind of incentive situation.
Sharon Bradford Franklin is former chair of the government's U.S. Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board.
How do we know that these companies that are getting paid will be responsible?
We don't. And that's one of the real problems here.
The contracting records show the companies could bring in over $1.2 billion combined searching for immigrants. Some are big firms, like a company run by the Geo Group, a corporation that operates private ICE detention centers for the government. We found other grant recipients list a post office box or home as the company address. Here's an example. Fraud Inc., run out of an apartment in Conroe, Texas. Reached by phone, Fraud Inc.'s president told us he works from home. ICE limits what he can say, but he said that his aim is to find as many undocumented immigrants as possible. He could earn up to $25 million, according to records we reviewed.
$25 million. That seems like a lot of money for a small company.
It does to me as well. Are there guardrails in place to ensure that they are finding the right person?
Gravitas Professional Services is another company led by Adam Visnick. He declined to talk to us, but his many YouTube videos show his work had been focused on much smaller jobs. Gravitas could earn more than $32 million from ICE. That's a lot of money for a business that lists a box in this Ohio post office as its main headquarters. But not as much as a company called AI Solutions 87, an LLC that lists this home in Wisconsin as its offices. The business could make more than $48 million looking for immigrants. No one from AI Solutions 87 would talk to us. ICE did not respond to our questions about the contracts. The hired companies are required to follow federal, state, and local laws. Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, Democrat of Illinois, just introduced the No Private Bounty Hunters for Immigration Enforcement Act. He says using private entities to locate immigrants would invite abuse, errors, and the erosion of public trust.
When the government outsources this type of surveillance, it increases the risk of abuse. There's even less ability to have oversight. There are rules that simply don't apply.
Can you put the guns down? There's kids in this house.
A question of just how much oversight there will be for companies racing to locate as many undocumented immigrants as possible.
All right, Patrick Terpstra, our investigative correspondent. Patrick, thank you for that report.
Sure thing.
This is Today As It Happened. Stick with us. Thanks for joining us again on Today As It Happened. I'm Stephanie Liebergen with your daily look at the day's biggest stories.
The University of Mississippi closing campus for the rest of the week because of dangerous winter weather conditions. The state suffering from the worst ice storm in 30 years, more than 150,000 there without power. And officials say restoring all of the electricity is going to take some time. Across the U.S., more than 700,000 don't have their power back on after this weekend's storm. And border czar Tom Homan is heading to Minnesota. President Trump sending him there after the shooting death of Alex Pretti over the weekend and Renee Good earlier this month, both at the hands of federal officers. The White House would not clarify if it means Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino will remain in Minnesota. He and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem have been the faces of the Trump administration's immigration enforcement activities up to this point. And the actions of immigration enforcement, of course, in Minnesota over the weekend are reverberating far beyond the state. Protesters now asking questions about when and how corporate America could respond. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett has been tracking this all. She joins us now from Denver. And Maura, what have you found?
Well, Andrew, there have been several recent flashpoints for companies to decide whether they are going to participate in corporate social responsibility. This moment over the weekend seems to have been the trigger point for Minnesota-based companies. More than 60 CEOs, including executives from Target, 3M, Best Buy, and General Mills, signed and released an open letter that was organized by the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. It called for calm and, quote, an immediate de-escalation of tensions. Though the letter did not specifically call out ICE, nor did it directly criticize federal enforcement tactics. Now, that specifically is notable with a company like Target signing on because there has been a lot of community backlash at how we've seen ICE target some of the workers in their distribution centers and other factories. And so that specific omission, not directly calling out ICE, we've seen a lot of backlash over from immigrant advocates as well as grassroots organizers. They've been urging consumers to pressure or boycott companies that they say do business with immigration enforcement agencies. Remember, we saw Target's profit drop in the last year after it pulled out of some DEI initiatives because we've seen more of those consumer boycotts. And so people have seen this be successful, and they believe that this is something that's worth calling for action to circulate online, to have other companies like Amazon, FedEx, and AT&T, for example, those that contract with ICE, to understand how consumers actually, from their point of view, should be controlling where companies stand in terms of these political issues. And for a long time, corporations have remained neutral, but right now organizers are arguing that neutrality isn't neutral at all because companies have this influence over policy through these contracts that I mentioned, lobbying, public messaging, donations, for example. And so the company's decisions to decide whether neutrality actually protects their brand or if silence actually becomes its own statement is really front and center here. And this is something that we've seen, as I mentioned, companies have to dance around over the last several years when it comes to political issues, siding with their consumers or taking the side of the federal government. Now, I do think it's important to note, as we saw all of this unfold this weekend, there was this sharp contrast in which several tech CEOs, including those from Amazon and Apple's Tim Cook, they were at the White House for a private screening of a new Amazon-produced documentary about Melania Trump. And so that just underscores how closely some business leaders remain tied to the administration, while some businesses are, at least, like the ones you see on your screen, are at least dipping their toe into speaking out against what we're seeing come from the federal government, Andrew.
All right, Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett for us. Maura, thank you.
Thanks for spending part of your evening with Today's It Happened. I'm Stephanie Liebergen. Have an excellent Monday night.